This is part 3 of my deep dive into Taylor Swift's album, The Torture Poets Department. My perspective is one of a songwriter and a former English teacher. In parts 1 and 2, we dissected the poem that Taylor included with the album. Now we need to talk about the one other thing that can significantly influence how someone interprets these songs. In fact, I believe it's the reason why it seems so hard to find consensus for what and whom some of these songs are about. And that reason is the presence of a red herring. And that red herring is Matty Healy. Let me explain. A red herring is something that appears to be relevant on the surface, but is actually a distraction. Usually, a red herring misdirects the audience from important information and misleads them into making an off-the-mark conclusion. The idea of a red herring being associated with the Torture Poets album was introduced very early on by Taylor during the pre-release, when her website quote-unquote crashed and displayed an error message with the words "red herring scrambled." At first, it seemed to be just that, a fake website crash that was a guise for an album announcement. But once the album came out and so many people started to interpret these songs to be about Matty and how he took her to the highest of highs and devastated her with the lowest of lows, even going as far as reinterpreting previous albums to be about him, that's when I suspected something else was happening. That the audience was led to make interpretations based on surface relevance, while a lot of the lyrical evidence pointed to someone else, that someone being Joe. To understand why I see Matty Healy as the red herring of the Torture Poets Department, we need to look at 3 thematic elements that relate to him, and how those same elements actually point toward Joe. I'm going to try to keep it simple here because there are just too many rabbit holes, but I will go into more detail when I talk about specific songs. The first thing that points to Matty as the red herring of the album is that Taylor makes a lot of references to a partner being of questionable character. Across these songs, we get an idea of a man who can be indecent, dishonest, or disloyal. Given Matty's persona as a provocateur and a public that readily sees him as someone who's vulgar and problematic, he easily fits the bill. Especially when you consider that Joe has managed to keep such a low profile and remain largely unknown as a public figure. By contrast alone, Matty seems to be the obvious subject of disapproval. But I would say that the audience is so willing to have Matty play the role of the bad guy that we're forgetting that Taylor has been sharing bits and pieces about Joe for many albums now that don't necessarily paint him in a positive light. We've upheld an image of Joe as this wholesome, clean-cut, straight-edge guy, but Taylor has written otherwise, such as in Lover, "You'll save all your dirtiest jokes for me," or in You're on Your Own, Kid, "I hear it in your voice, you're smoking with your boys," or in Tolerated, "I take your indiscretions all in good fun." More importantly, every single album starting from Folklore has included strong themes of betrayal. From Cardigan, "Chase 2 girls, lose the one," to Hoax, "Your faithless love's the only hoax I believe in," to Evermore, "Sending signals to be double-crossed," to The Great War, "Maybe it was her, but Diesel is desire, you are playing with fire." And now to this album, in So Long Lyndon, "I didn't opt in to being your odd man out," to Fresh Out the Slammer, "He was with her in dreams," to How Did It End, "We fell victim to interlopers' glances." We can go on and on. The point is, the red herring that is Matty Healy may be distracting the audience from the fact that Taylor has been very consistent in what she has been writing and sharing about Joe. To attribute all these songs to be about Matty would require us to reinterpret previous albums to be about him as well, and that's just not logical. Now, some might say, couldn't she be saying the same thing about the both of them? Maybe, but when you dig down into most of these songs, the lyrical evidence says otherwise. The second thing that points to Matty being the red herring of the Torture Poets Department is that some of the songs allude to a relationship that Taylor has returned to after having had time apart, or her expressing regret for having made another attempt at a romance that previously had failed. At first glance, a quick connection can be made to Matty for the fact that he and Taylor had met about 10 years ago and shared up flirtation, according to his own words at the time, but they never dated. So when Matty and Taylor linked up again after her breakup with Joe, many people saw this as the on-again relationship that's mentioned in some of the songs. But we're forgetting that there's actually strong lyrical evidence on the Folklore and Evermore albums that Taylor and Joe had actually broken up during that time for a few months before getting back together again. And if we go back even further, there is lyrical evidence from the Reputation and Lover albums that their relationship was kind of rocky from the beginning. So the connection here to Matty being a rekindled flame is only relevant on a surface level. The audience is distracted from remembering that Taylor and Joe's relationship was on again, off again. The third and final thing that points to Matty being the red herring of the Torture Poets department is that the emotional arc of Taylor's fling with Matty kind of mirrors the emotional arc of her relationship with Joe, especially at the height of things. But to attribute the emotional highs of every song to Matty would be to overlook the fundamental difference between the nature of these two relationships. As I said in a previous video, Matty was simply the door through which Taylor moved on from Joe. Joe was the love of her life. Matty was the rebound. Whatever heightened emotions she felt with Matty was in essence a counter-reaction to the extreme lows she felt with Joe toward the end of their relationship. It's the pendulum swing that Taylor refers to in her poem for the album. It's important then to differentiate between the emotional highs of being with someone you're in love with versus the cathartic revelry of a rebound, and the emotional lows of whatever letdown you may find with a rebound versus the devastation of ending a relationship that you once thought was for life. With this in mind, instead of approaching the album strictly from the perspective of which songs are about Joe and which songs are about Matty, which can leave us vulnerable to the red herring, I think a better way to approach the songs is to consider the emotional state behind each of them, which I've organized into what I call the 4 stages of a breakup. Stage 1 is what I call ground zero of a breakup, where there's a lot of grief, doubt about the decision to end a relationship, and fear for the future. Stage 2 is what I call moving forward while looking back. Stage 3 is moving forward, looking around. And stage 4 is moving forward and looking ahead. This is the framework within which I will discuss the songs.